Here's a guy who thinks he proved that evolution is false.
In this previous video I made, I said evolution is false, and that's just a fact.
Citation needed.
And that wasn't even close to the main point of this video, and so instead of actually responding to the main points that I made in the video, people just spammed a bunch of comments. You say evolution is false? Ha ha ha, I know that everything that you say I can't take seriously now. So I just wanted to make this quick video proving that evolution isn't scientific, it's not a valid theory, and it is more so a religious presupposition that atheists hold. And it's honestly insane how easy it is to disprove the theory of evolution. I'm just going to give you two simple arguments. The second one is going to be much better than the first. Now, before I actually refute the theory of evolution, we just have to point out the obvious fact that atheists still cannot account for the origin of life itself.
What does that have to do with evolution? Even if it were the case that God created the first self-replicating nucleotide chains, it would still be the case that the overwhelming preponderance of evidence shows that every species which exists evolved from those simplest nucleotide chains.
They know that they have absolutely no explanation for the first living organism that appeared on Earth. So of course they ask, not in these words, but they ask for us to give them one miracle, which is life from non-life, in order to kickstart their theory of evolution. If you just give us one cell, one instance of life coming from non-life.
What do you think life is exactly? Life is self-replicating nucleotide chains. If you believe that life only comes from life, then you either believe that God is made of self-replicating nucleotide chains, or you don't understand what life is. Also, life does not begin with the first cell. Self-replicating nucleotide chains were alive even before they became surrounded by a phospholipid bilayer,
which we cannot explain. Then we can start talking about evolution here. That's where the theory comes from. So right off the bat, this whole theory of evolution is just a dodge. And it is well known that the theory of evolution was popularized by people who were trying to undermine the biblical account of creation. That's literally the motivation for it. It might not be the motivation for some people today, but that was the original motivation.
Where did you get that idea? And even if that was the motivation for popularizing evolution, what does that have to do with whether evolution is consistent with the evidence?
And it wasn't even scientific to begin with. The science part of it came along later with Darwin. It started out, and honestly still is today, a philosophical idea rather than a scientific one that can be observed and proven.
So the fossil record can't be observed? Current speciation events can't be observed? The consistency of genetic evidence with the fossil record can't be observed?
Second thing I have to point out before I completely refute evolutionary theory is that we are talking about history here. If you want to know what happened in the past, who lived in the past, the primary source that we have to use is eyewitness testimony.
You can make hypotheses about things that happened in the past, which you can then empirically test in the present. I don't know if you realize this, but things that happen in the past have consequences that can be observed in the present. If I told you that I was never born, and that to say that I was is unscientific because you weren't there to witness my birth, don't you think that would be at least a little silly? By this dude's logic, forensic science isn't science. Who cares if a suspect's DNA was found under a victim's fingernails when his buddy says he saw him elsewhere at the time, right?
If you want to find out what George Washington did, you don't go looking at his bones. If you want to know what happened to George Washington, you don't go looking at his bones. You don't dig up his dead body to find out.
Well, that depends on what specifically you're trying to find out about what he did. Looking at people's remains is, in fact, a very common way to discern things that they did during their lifetime. For example, there was a woman who claimed to be the daughter of Salvador Dali and that she was entitled to inherit some of his money. She even had an eyewitness, her mother. Her mom said that she totally did it with Dali and that her daughter is Dali's daughter. After 10 years of litigation, the authorities eventually exhumed Dali's body in order to get a DNA sample so they could do a proper paternity test, and the test came back negative. By this dude's logic, we should take the mom's word that her daughter is Dali's daughter over the DNA evidence which proves otherwise.
That's not the primary source. The primary source is always going to be what people told about him. And so the most common accusation against Christians is that, oh, you're anti-science, you're anti-this, you're anti-that. No, we are against your science and your ideas about what happened in the past, even though you weren't there to observe it.
If we have physical evidence that contradicts testimonial evidence, shouldn't we trust the physical evidence more? If we can't trust fossils and DNA over testimony, why should we trust a paternity test over the lady who said she was impregnated by Salvador Dali?
Now here's the deal. Let's get into this. Even if we were there to observe evolution, even if humans could have a bird's eye view of all of human history, and they say it's billions of years.
Human history is billions of years? Who says that? Maybe this dude means the history of life rather than just human history. The earliest humans only appeared about 3 million years ago at the very most.
But biblically, of course, it's much less than that. Even if we could have a bird's eye view, watching the world and all of evolution throughout billions of years, even if we could view that, evolution would still be a false theory.
So even if we could directly see common ancestry, the idea of common ancestry would still be false?
So for the sake of the argument, let's just grant the atheist one miracle. Okay, there's a single-celled organism. It came into existence somehow. They can't explain it.
We can, in fact, explain single-celled organisms. They evolved from self-replicating nucleotide chains that were enveloped by a phospholipid bilayer. What we don't have a complete picture of is how the first self-replicating nucleotide chains formed. I don't really see why the formation of such a molecule would require a miracle, though.
It's a miracle. Let's say that that's true, okay? According to the theory of evolution, that one single blob of life over millions upon millions of years through completely natural processes transformed into gorillas, giraffes, broccoli, fish, flying fish. Have you seen those videos of flying fish? The amount of diversity that we see in the world is absolutely amazing, but that's the idea. And essentially, Darwin said that the organisms which are best suited to adapt to the environment will survive and propagate more, and the organisms which are less suited to survive the environment will die out, and of course, they'll go extinct. Now, at this point, there's actually a second miracle that we would have to grant to the atheist for this theory, and that would be the miracle that these organisms, which are not conscious yet, somehow are trying to survive, and that it's somehow beneficial for its own species to keep going on.
Nope, they don't need to try. Natural selection acts like a filter. Let's say water with lots of particles in it is flowing through a filter through which smaller particles can pass and larger particles cannot. Does saying that some particles will make it through the filter and others won't in any way imply that those particles are trying to pass through it? Obviously not. The same is true of genetic mutations. None of them are trying to survive. It just happens to be the case that some do and some don't. That doesn't require any kind of conscious trying.
I mean, that's literally the origin of the word natural selection. It's nature doing the choosing. We have an unconscious entity choosing things, making decisions.
Again, no. Natural selection does not literally consciously select things. Again, it's just a filter through which some genes more often pass and other genes less often pass. Natural selection doesn't choose which mutations pass through it any more than a filter chooses smaller particles to pass through it instead of larger ones.
Okay, so once again, let's grant them that miracle, that nature is making decisions.
No, nature is filtering things. Filters don't need to be conscious in order to sort some things from others.
So once again, as atheists, they cannot deny that they are just as religious as Christians are and everyone else. They worship nature.
If I worshipped nature, I would prefer all natural things over all artificial things. I don't. I live in a house and use computers.
Nature makes the choices. I'm here because of nature. Nature created me. Nature did this. Nature did that.
Is that what you think worship means? To worship something simply means to believe that it does lots of stuff?
It's nature. Nature is their God. Now, the moment you've been waiting for. This is the killer of the theory of evolution. This is the thorn in the side of every evolutionist. The reason why the theory is a false theory, it cannot work, is because it, by definition, is untestable, unobservable, and of course, unprovable.
If that were the case, nobody would ever have observed speciation occur, which we have, in fact, observed. Nobody would have been able to make accurate predictions about the features of fossils that had yet to be discovered. We have. That's how the Tiktaalik was discovered. Its features and the rock strata in which it would be discovered were both accurately predicted beforehand. If evolution weren't testable, then nobody would have been able to use it to predict human genetic structure. We have. That's how we predicted that one of the human chromosomes would show evidence of being a fusion of two chromosomes. Chimps have more chromosomes than we do, so if we share a common ancestor, one of our chromosomes would have to show signs of fusion, and we discovered that chromosome 2, in fact, does. There are lots of predictions that have been based on the idea of evolution, which, when tested, have corroborated it. That's science. That's how science works.
This is because there is no way to independently verify whether or not a certain organism will be better fit to survive than other organisms other than simply looking at which organism survived.
Maybe what he's getting at is that the phrase survival of the fittest in an evolutionary context is tautological. I think that's true, but that's not the central claim of evolution. The Origin of Species was written because Darwin saw lots of diversity among organisms and wanted to find an explanation for why there is so much diversity. The conclusion he came to was that diversity grants adaptability, and homogeneity leaves a species vulnerable to environmental changes. The more genetically homogeneous a species is, the more likely it is that, for example, a new pathogen that can kill one member of that species will be able to kill all members of that species. The more diverse a species is, the less likely that this will be the case. This is not tautological, and it has been empirically corroborated.
A similar kind of theory would be a theory that says all of the best presidents are named George Washington. That's something that we can test out. Let's take all the best presidents and find out whether or not their names are George Washington. What we can't do is look at all the best presidents and automatically assume that their names are George Washington. And this is what the theory of evolution does. These are the ones that have survived, therefore they were the most fit to survive. And so it's essentially survival of the survivors.
This is not what the theory of evolution is. The theory of evolution says different organisms share common ancestry, which is testable and falsifiable, and that the reason why organisms with common ancestry are so different is because their environments and ecological niches have filtered their genes in such a way as to produce those differences. This is also testable and falsifiable. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.